What's going on, everyone? Today we're taking a look at a very fun theme-based build I call the Shock Trooper. Now, this revolves around some space trooper-looking items that grant a large amount of lightning damage. I ran through an entire Apocolypse campaign with this to show it off, and it's a very fun way to play Remnant 2. Now, before we even get into it, I will mention I made this build to be very survivable. You can clear adds like crazy, which is nice for getting through areas, but the damage in boss fights isn't always S tier. It's still good and will get you through, but on harder difficulties, you may need to change up rings and weapons for some world bosses. That being said, it has quite a bit to offer, and there will be ways to customize it to your liking as well. So let's jump right in and shock our way through Remnant 2. The primary class we want to run is Invader. Now, this will grant us a bunch of cool perks, but the two we really care about are the Prime perk and Override. The Prime will summon a decoy when you cast an Invader skill. This decoy only lasts 3 seconds, but you get a 15% damage boost when an enemy is targeting that decoy. Override is huge, as it makes your next evade after using a relic spawn a decoy. This one lasts 5.5 seconds. This is an extremely powerful passive that we're going to abuse to force even bosses to fight a decoy instead of us. With the correct relic, you can get any enemy in the game off of you for 5 seconds, granting a chance to reload, dodge away, or deal better damage. It honestly is crazy to me that people aren't using this more, as it adds a completely different way to go into combat. Now, we will need to use relics to do this, but with the particular relic we have, we're going to have 20 of them, which is more than plenty to use the decoys as much as you like, even in Apocalypse. As far as the skill, we'll be running Void Cloak. This basically makes you instant dodge any attack on your character for a certain amount of time. Actually, a long time. Now, this means you can mess up a few times without dying. It will save your butt so often, and when running around in Lawsome with those gun-wielding maniacs, it's beautiful. You can use this several times in a boss fight as well if it comes down to that. For our subclass, we have Challenger. There's a variety of nice perks on this class as well, but we mainly care about the close quarters. Grants a 35% increase to all damage when you're 10 meters from an enemy. Take this to mean you always have 35% more damage. As we'll be running an up-close weapon set with invincibility from Invader, you can safely be 2 feet from your opponent without much difficulty. Medic can also pair very well here as well, but I like the 35% bump a lot more than only 25% that the healer offers. The skill you want from this class is War Stomp. Not only is it a very aggressive skill, but it fits nicely with the build theme. This grants 2 energy waves that stagger enemies and deal high damage. It's very good against waves of foes, and overall, a very fun skill to use. When it comes to armor, there is nothing more trooper-looking than the Leto Mark II set. This has the highest defense rating of any armor in Remnant 2, and will have you walking around like a tank. The weight is an issue, but with the bright steel ring, we can have the fastest dodge still, so no worries there. This set allows for much better survivability if you do happen to get hit, and you could be your saving grace when bosses aren't able to one-hit you. Oh, and the helmet looks great paired with our main weapon, as fashion is important. The Relic is extremely valuable for this build, as you must use the Lifeless Heart. It will only heal you for 30 of your health on use, but you also get double the amount of relics. This brings us up to 20 relics right off the bat. You can now eat them for the decoy effect instead of actually healing. And if it comes down to getting hit, you can always take 3 to regen back up. Sounds like a lot of work for a relic, but it pairs perfectly with the build, and once you're used to it, the synergy with Invader will have you excited to use them as fast as possible. For relic fragments, it's best to run elemental damage, skill duration, and skill cooldown. The elemental damage is for our shock damage, as that's basically all we do, and both the others help our invincibility from Invader stay up as long as possible, and come back faster. Get the mythic versions as fast as possible, as the higher percentage can make all the difference. For your main weapon, we actually have 2 different options to switch between. For open areas with adds, I use the Repulsor. It looks like a futuristic sci-fi weapon and matches the helmet in an odd sort of way. The reason to run this is for elites. The gun does very high weak spot damage, but its mod can nullify any difficult enemy, including aberrations. Banish will teleport a target into another red dimension for 4 seconds. In that dimension, they cannot be harmed, but they also can't move. This gives you time to reload, back off, or ready some more damage. Once the mod dissipates, you deal 1.5 times more damage to that target with the Repulsor, which can lead to some incredible weak spot damage with no rings to boost it. I found this to be invaluable for staying alive in dungeons, as you can freeze and then run backwards to get better position. I like the Mutator feedback, as it helps generate the mod back a bit, and you get 3 charges at any time, so it's pretty spammable. The other main gun you need to have is the Black Maw AR-47. Really, you can run whatever main gun you like, but you want to slot it with Overflow. The Overflow mod adds lightning or shock damage to the bullets, also increasing reload speed. As we will be maining shock damage, this provides a much better damage dealer for boss fights. Running Twisting Wounds as a mutator gets you some easy bleeding over time and 20% more damage. A good option overall for most guns. On lower difficulties, you can just use the Repulsor, but as this setup doesn't buff it and only buffs shock, it can't compete well enough in Apocolypse. Your melee weapon will of course be the Krell Axe. Dealing shock damage and being the most fun throwing weapon in the game, it works well here. I found this axe to be very usable in combat even though we aren't running a heavy melee build. Because our shock damage is so high, you can actually throw it and insta-kill some smaller enemies, which comes in handy when you're out of bullets. For the mutator, it doesn't matter much as it seems the one that reduces stamina cost doesn't really work all that well. So Steadfast should be pretty good as a replacement. Finally, we come to the piece de resistance, Enigma. As your trusty sidearm, the Enigma will clear adds all day with zero effort. There's no reason to run any other gun when dealing a shock build, and this is why I run the Repulsor. You only need it for the Save Yourself mod. Enigma will lock onto any target close to medium range and bolt them with electricity, chaining into other enemies for more damage and instant clearing of rooms. The mod will chain bolts to each other, creating a wall of death which melts those who enter. Shock is brutal with this on, and dungeons are way too easy. Now, in boss fights, Enigma doesn't perform as well, but it still gets in some work, making quick work of any extra peons and keeping constant electric damage on the boss. I kid you not, this weapon alone can get you through the bosses in no time at all, helping me beat Apocolypse in about 6 hours or less if you do even better. Scary number of enemies means higher damage, which means death all around you. As for the mutator, I run Bandit. Granting extra ammo back to the magazine is big as the reload is very slow and the ammo capacity can be gone through quickly. It doesn't even need a damage boost anyway, so offering more bullets instead works very well. As for amulets and rings, we want shock, shock, and more shock. Shock device increases shock damage by 20% and overloaded damage by 50%, driving Enigma through the roof in damage. Alumni ring grants 10% more elemental damage, and last time I checked, shock is elemental damage. Feedback loop is a very strong ring here that is loads of fun to use. Essentially, it makes any perfect dodge you do deal a large shock blast that kills basic enemies outright. When paired with Invader, you can get this to work without perfect dodging as the skill will do it for you. A very easy way to get some extra damage while playing like you already need to, and it's fun to perfect dodge enemies into death. There aren't a ton of places this ring will be useful in endgame builds, so it's nice to be able to use it here and have it be an important part of the build. Grounding Stone increases shock damage by 10% and shock resistance by 15%. A small bump to shock, but it adds up in the end. Finally, we have the Bright Steel Ring. This allows us to look like a beast and still dodge any attack easily. I felt like it was the perfect pairing to make the theme work, and it helps you put the feedback ring to work. With all these trinkets, you have very high shock damage, the ability to kill enemies by just dodging, and the best dodge roll with heavy armor. Enigma wrecks the game with this, and you could focus on avoiding damage more often without actually needing to deal any with your guns. As a shock trooper, we do need some specific traits to be an electro tank, so here are the ones you need. Fortify from Engineer for more armor effectiveness, Strong Back from Challenger for less armor encumbrance, Untouchable from Invader for a much larger dodge window. Dodging is a main part of this build, so it fits perfectly. Vigor for more health, Endurance for more stamina, Spirit for more mod power generation, and Expertise for more skill cooldown. I like to run Amplitude so the shock blasts hit more enemies and it won't hurt you like with other AoEs, so no harm done. Bark Skin makes a nice touch as it reduces incoming damage, and when we do take a hit, this allows our heavy armor build to actually act like we're wearing heavy armor and not just scrap metal. The Shock Trooper build makes you as unkillable as you can be without actually purposely taking damage. The idea is to get into close quarters and use Enigma to clear out crowds. The Repulsor slows down tougher opponents like elites and give you a chance to better prepare yourself. This can be big for some aberrations as they're sort of bosses, and somehow this works on a lot of them. Once the effect wears off, you can deal more damage or just freeze them again. The Invader skill can be popped as often as possible to make any damage taken do nothing. The Challenger Wave skill is just plain fun, but does help out and can deal plenty of damage to make it worth using. Then, of course, any dodge you make kills enemies, and since Apocalypse is tough, you'll learn to dodge quickly and get a lot of power from doing so. The decoy allowed me to have the Feyring King and Lossum never attack me. He was always on the decoy, and I just shot him without almost any threat at all. For the final boss of the game, my damage was bad. I mean, really bad. This setup just isn't optimal for damaging him alone. But despite the lack in damage, I was able to beat him in 3 tries on the hardest difficulty. Invader will keep you alive through so many hits, and once it regens back up, you pop the skill again. I was amazed at how well this build did throughout the entire game, and honestly, just had a great time. Now, the Cancer boss and maybe the Brain boss from Nerud, I had to switch things up, as they suck. But almost everything else was very doable, and Shock has some serious power against bosses resistant to fire and acid. Hopefully you enjoyed this video, and if you did, feel free to leave a like down below. I had this idea in mind before I even tested the build, as it just seems so cool of an idea, and that feedback loop is awesome when you learn to utilize it in combat. No, the Shock Trooper is not the best build in Remnant 2, but I beat the game with it and had a lot of fun doing so maybe you will too. As always, I will have a full build layout here at the end, and I'll catch you next time.